Winsome whistling wind, let me listen in. I chased you through these trees and tasted your tender breeze.
Greetings, my friends, and welcome back to beautiful Southern Washington State here in this second episode of my channel's Farm EDC update. For those of you who may have missed last episode, I've gone home to help my father-in-law. He runs a big chicken farm, and he was recently in an accident, hurt his hand, and he's unable to work at the moment. So it's a balmy 85-degree day here in Washington State. I've been tuning up the feed systems for the chicken barn, which has 30,000 chickens in it, and trying to get a hold of that temperature, not wanting the chickens to die. And so it's been a full day, but I finally got everything sort of equalized. We got the barn around 78 degrees, so I think the chickens will be doing pretty well. And I showered, thankfully, so I don't smell like chicken poo. Not that that would probably matter to you guys very much, but it's nice for me. And here we are with a second update on what sorts of things on this crazy trip to the US I have been carrying for my EDC. Well, this part of the episode starts with a little bit of an explanation. So a few years back, one of my viewers, who's an awesome guy named Calvin, reached out to me and he said, hey, I work for the US government in the Supreme Court building, and if you're ever in Washington, D.C. area, I'd love to give you and your wife or whoever from your family a little tour of the building. And this year, coming back to the US, I finally took him up on it. We had the most mind-boggling, amazing, surreal trip to Washington, D.C. It was so cool. I can't even describe to you how cool it is, and I can't even show you the pictures because the security clearance was that spectacular. And at the end of this trip, Calvin took me aside and gave me a few knives. So I have a few more knives that I have been working in to my EDC rotation here on the farm, and I have a bit of a surprise for the end. So today I am carrying the Manly Knives Peak. Calvin gave me one of these guys in 14C 28 in steel. These guys ship out their knives around 10,000ths of an inch behind the edge, and you've got a real lean grind. Like, we're talking Spyderco Endura with the behind the edge geometry, almost of like an Opinel. And if you have had either of those two knives, you know what I'm talking about. And it's just a wonderful basic design, lots of grip patterns possible, and I've been really enjoying sharpening this guy. You may notice that the finish on the front, I don't know if you can see that, but it's a little bit wonky, and that's because I was trying to lay it down a lot and take it to a shallower angle, more acute angle on the edge, because it's 14C28N. Like, you can take it as acute as you want, and it's just gonna keep performing. Either I slipped, which is probably more probable, or there's a little bit of irregularities in the grind, which is probably not unprobable. But some of the scratch patterns started climbing up the face of this, and it looked really ugly. So I just set this to the stone and redid the satin finish, but there's a little hollow right here where it doesn't look quite right. And there's a few spots up here where I pushed a bit too hard and it rounded out up there. So I'll probably come back at some point and clean up that satin finish and grind it all the way down so that I can get a solid uniform finish all the way across the knife. But the benefit of laying it down and redoing the satin finish is you make it even thinner behind the edge, and you can kind of tweak and tune what you want that finish to look like. The Manly Knives Peak has been awesome. It's probably my favorite knife of this trip for food prep. I love it for food prep, and that's what Calvin told me. He's like, this is a kitchen knife in your pocket. I 100% agree with that. I like the clip. If I'm going to be honest and give a few cons, none of them are really that big of a deal. The hole here is pretty sharp, when it first comes, and so it does feel like it could like cut your finger, and the spine's quite sharp as well, which would be great if you're scraping a ferro rod, but in everyday use it just feels a little bit unfinished. Also, the ergonomics, you can grip it in a lot of different positions, but this hollow right here that's supposed to be for a finger, it feels like a really way too far back, like a really unnatural place for me to grab the knife. So I'm not sure exactly what they're going for there. I may actually go back and do my own like contouring and grind away some finger wells if I like this knife as much as I anticipate. I like the thumb ramp. I like that there's jimping here. I don't mind that there's not jimping on the thumb. The thing that I will say is the lock is really stiff when it ships out. It's solid, like it's not a lot of wobble in there, but it's a little bit hard to get it open and a little bit hard to get it closed. But also, if you're doing food prep, you can feel that when you push that downward pressure, the spine of the knife and the lock bar sort of rise a little bit out of the scales. And in my experience, yeah, I can feel it there. When I've made folding knives, that's usually because I don't have a very good fit on the pivot pin through. And that pivot pin, the blade is actually able to wobble around that. It doesn't affect your lockup and safety much at all in a backlock model, but it does make for a sort of unfinished feeling knife. And so that's like the one, I guess, sort of substantial downside I would say about this knife. I anticipate I'm going to try this with a lot of different stones, and I'm probably going to get the edge so beautiful at this thickness that I can't help but carry it. I really like it, but just if you've always been thinking, I had always been thinking about getting one of these, and if you've always been thinking about getting one, that is my honest observations. There's not a lot of big downsides, but if I was to name them, there they are. I've been doing daily bonfires, inviting my friends over to come and hang out. This is the wood I left to dry out from my last fire. And definitely the Manly Knives Peak in 14C28N so far has been my favorite cardboard knife. When we come back to the US, we always sort of bulk up on things that are easier to get while we're here in the US, and so it means a lot of Amazon packages get purchased, and I put those Amazon boxes to good use, helping me light the fire every single day. This 14C20N is just now starting to show signs that you got to put a little more effort into it, and the edge is just starting to fade a little bit, but it has been a dream to cut cardboard up with for days. So now another funny thing happened to me out here on the farm, because there was one day that it rained really hard, and I was walking through the yard and I looked down and I saw this glint of metal in the yard, and I was like, what is that? And so I bent down and grabbed the object and pulled it out of the ground, and it was a rusty Leatherman Charge. This Charge, guys, I don't know if the Leatherman Charge standard comes with 154 cm, but this one has a 154 cm blade, and basically like 95% of the tools that you get on a Leatherman Wave, it's in nearly new condition. So I was like, oh, that's gotta belong to my father-in-law. I'm sure that he just dropped that. So I'm gonna take some steel wool, which I have, and I'm gonna clean it up and scrub the rust off and get it really beautiful. This has been a discouraging time for him, so I'm going to restore this tool for him, and it doesn't have any of the bits, so I still gotta buy those. And that'll be that. So I went to present it to him, and he said, that's not mine. So I went to my brother-in-law and I'm like, hey bro, did you lose a Leatherman Charge? Sent him a picture. He's like, no. Sister-in-law, same thing. Nobody. So I inherited a super nice Leatherman Charge for free because I found it in the ground. When I pulled it out of the ground, there was like packed mud in every single crevice. So I did do my work to get this thing clean, but I've really enjoyed it. It takes a good edge on that 154 cm. It feels really nice on the edge with minimal work. And once I get the bit set for it, and I may also get a pocket clip, but I imagine I will be carrying this one quite a bit. It's still a little bit of a brick. My old Leatherman is so slender and almost pin-like. I really like that about it. The Gerber center drive that I showed last video is such a brick and a handful. And this is like probably about a 1/4 inch thinner, and it's probably almost a full inch less high. So you put it in your pocket and it feels more like an old Nokia dumb phone rather than the Gerber center drive, which literally feels like you just put like a brick from a building in your pocket. Sometimes it's just really, really big. I don't mean to overemphasize that, but I do have to say it's quite a thing to carry. Number 3, my friend Calvin gave me a Tanto cold steel Airlite. Sorry, I didn't clean these off. That's a total Pete move, isn't it? A cold steel Airlite in Tanto. Now, I am not the biggest Tanto guy. I don't know if Calvin knew that or not, but in the past I've been like, oh, I don't really like the utility of them. They're not very practical. They sort of change directions mid-cut. I don't really like them. And they tend to be fairly thick and everything, but I determined when Calvin gave this beauty to me, what he told me is he's like, just try and break this with your farm work, Gabe. Just see what you can throw at it, because I haven't been able to do anything that shakes this cold steel Airlite. Very thin design, but very, very robust and strong. That triad lock is so strong. It's got a little Emerson wave on it so that it flicks out when you pull it out of your pocket. So I've made up my mind, I'm going to give this thing a shot. So we'll start with cons. A con that I would say to this knife is the grip is very square. It's not super comfortable to chop on something with or for long-term use. It's really nice for a knife that sort of disappears width-wise into your pocket and then has like a full grip for a short task. So I'm not complaining about the grip. It's not bad. It's just not the most comfortable thing that's ever been made. I would say this clip, I think this has been mentioned by other reviewers, this clip is not high enough on the end. I have a really hard time. Any of my pants that are like just frayed a little bit, this clip wants to go in between the two and tear the seam. And so I have struggled a little bit to work it in to my pants from time to time. And that is a little bit of a deterrent to me wanting to carry it. Now, I'll probably, after this video is done, just take my new Leatherman Charge and grab that with my needle nose pliers and bend it out a little bit, and it'll be sorted. I don't even know why I'm taking the time to mention it now. But if you're finicky about doing aftermarket modifications to your knife, just be aware you might not like this clip. Now to the pros. Okay. After using the Manly Knives Peak, I got used to really kind of having to herc that blade out of there and give it a good solid push to deploy the knife. And I was like, oh yeah, this is what a backlock feels like. Backlocks are a little stiff. They can be flicked if you really work at it. But they're sort of like the stiffer, reliable sort of action of knives. And then I started using this triad lock, and this triad lock is more secure. It's like a backlock that's more secure than most backlocks. And guys, it's butter. I don't know how cold steel does this, but it has really good action. It just wants to flick all day, and it comes out of your pocket. I can reverse flick it. Well, let's see if I can reverse flick it without the wrist. Look at that. That's awesome. Anyway, I have been so impressed with the action on this for a backlock. Pete sent me the drop point version of this knife, and I forwarded it on to a viewer because I was like, it's kind of thicker behind the edge. It's not really my style. And I was used to these other knives that have really excellent action. But now from the frame of reference I'm at right now, having used other backlocks, I'm like, actually, compared to what you have to give up in smoothness to get this sort of lockup, this thing is really smooth. I've been really pleased with that. This knife, honestly, I go out for walks in the morning, and I'll usually just take off through the woods. My father-in-law owns a big chunk of land here, and including some forest land and various things. And I'm used to being in New Zealand, where there's like no natural predators. So here, for a while, I was carrying the cold steel SRK I showed in the last video, just as a sort of like, if I ran into cougar, coyote, bear, it'd be nice to have something on me. And to be honest, this knife has completely displaced the Cold Steel SRK fixed blade, because I feel just as confident with this Tanto Airlite in my hand as I do with that fixed blade. That's really saying something. One more con I forgot to mention is that although the triad lock is like the pinnacle of solid lockup, if you do things that rattle it or jar it, like I chopped through a few branches with this knife, it was a little bit uncomfortable on the grip here, and it developed just as much wobble as you'd get in like a Benchmade or something like that. This pivot screw sort of wants to rotate its way out. I know that's normal. I don't know that you can get around that with any knife, but I wanted to mention that even the great triad lock that so many of us knife guys are like, this is the pinnacle of strong locks. It's not invincible to wobble and play developing without being tuned up regularly. Now, a final word on the Cold Steel Airlite. Has it changed my mind about Tantos? And actually, I have to say, yes, it has. Some of you may be surprised by that, but I've actually found that the size of tip on this one is nice if you need to like scrape something. Sometimes I'll need to cut viney brush off of a log that I'm getting for firewood. And because it's flat, you can just kind of flick it down and it lands flat on the log, and you can clip, 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 clip. So that's actually been super useful at times. I've found for food prep, it's not the nicest, but I cut up like a decent chunk of roast beef and just laid the sucker flat and pulled it across the cutting board. And it actually did just fine with that hollow grind that's back here. Those of you who don't know, Tantos originally, they had a hollow grind here as this one does, and then they transitioned to a flat grind out there that's very short, which keeps that tip thickness so that the tip is not supposed to break. And that's how they sort of classified this as a sort of militarized or tactical design. I've also been finding that the Tantos that I had in the past, and the reason I have this stigma about them, they'd be like your old like Kershaw rescue knife, or like something to that extent, or like Smith & Wesson, I think, back in the day when I was trying out Tanto. And those ones from here, well, first off, they'd have like a 3.4 inch blade rather than like the 3.6 you've got here. Second off, from here to here, they'd have a serrated blade, which means if you need to do anything fine edge, you've only got this portion. But on those knives that I've had in the past, this portion wasn't even this long. It was like that long. And then this was much longer to come up. So you have like 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches of Tanto, but there's never really a length of edge that's super long to be usable. So the thing that's changed my mind about this Tanto blade, this Cold Steel Airlite, is that they left the main cutting surface of the knife from the heel to this angle change really, really long. And then they kind of abbreviated or kept short this little flat tip. And I find that this much edge is enough to get in a box and cut tape. It's enough to whittle wood. It's enough to do any of the normal things that I have been doing out here on the farm. And I've really been liking it. I don't know if I will keep it forever and ever and ever, but it's pretty cool to get a gift from a guy who's in the armed forces that's a tactical knife, so I probably will. Last up on the knife front of gift knives, although I should mention, on this trip to DC, I also received some beautiful kitchen knives from my friend Daniel, and they are so cool that I'm so stoked to share them with you all. And Daniel, if you're watching, I'm working on it. But they were not sharpened at the time that I received them, and I didn't have my nice stones to sharpen them, and I wanted to put an edge on them for the first video that does them justice and review them at their peak sort of sharpness or functionality level. So watch out as I get back to New Zealand mid-October into early November. Watch out for another video featuring some other knives that are actually made by a viewer. But for the purposes of this video and the gifts that I got from my friend Calvin, I don't know if your guys' response to this will be the same as mine, but my response was no flippin' way, because Calvin gave me a Hitachi super blue clad Spyderco Dragonfly with the Zome handle. And he handed this to me. You can see the line there where the cladding steel, the stainless ends, and the carbon steel, the Japanese carbon steel begins. I opened this up and I looked at Calvin and I was like, Calvin, they haven't made that for like 10 years. And he looked at me and he was like, bro, I know. I bought so many when they did. And I was like, bro, I was too poor to afford it when they did make it, but I wanted one so bad. Thank you so much. I love the Spyderco Dragonfly as like a just awesome ergonomics box opener, little utility office knife. I'm super, super stoked to put some kilometers or miles on this knife. And I'm really getting excited to get home to my stones to put a proper edge on it. Spyderco Dragonfly, super blue steel, super duper duper cool. Oh man, the ergonomics on a Dragonfly is the best of any tiny knife. Absolutely the best. Well done, Sal Glesser. So update sharpening session number 1. I just completed on the Hitachi blue steel Spyderco Dragonfly. Went from the coarse on the Work Sharp field sharpener to the fine diamond to ceramic with light edge leading strokes on the ceramic rod to stroppy stuff, 1 micron and 0.25 micron. I probably spent about 15 minutes on it and I'm very pleased. It is cleanly slicing through this crazy weird corrugated paper towel, just supported on one side like nobody's business. Wildly sharp. So very, very, very pleased so far with the blue steel. Day 1 of use of the super blue steel Spyderco Dragonfly after first sharpening. I prepped a little bit of food for my nephew with it, just cut up some carrots and stuff and cut up all the cardboard for my fire, so I had a decent sized box, and I cut off all 8 of the end panels, top and bottom, and fed them in to feed the fire. And coming back to the house here, I am finding that we are still able to cleanly slice held paper towel, holding it on one side, and quite easily with 2 sides. So very, very good results. I find the cheaper steels that I've been using, the 8CR MOV and your sort of cold steel SK5 and those sorts of steels really struggle with any cardboard contact to retain that shaving edge for very long, or handheld paper towel. So pretty cool. That's totally untouched on the strop so far, by the way. That is just straight from the task to this moment. So I'm assuming when I strop it, it's going to be quite shavy and keen again. Last but not least, and I'll probably have to end up demonetizing this video to show you this, but on the note of outdoor safety, I came back and asked my dad, hey dad, where's my gun at? And he said, I don't know. So I used to have a Taurus 357 Magnum revolver, and I got it for hikes. Here in Washington, there's big enough predators that it's not dumb to have something on you that you could use to defend yourself. You know, you don't go looking for it, and it's pretty unlikely, but at the same time, I sometimes go on hikes well out into nature. A couple days ago, I was up at the northern ring of Mount St. Helens, and you know, you're pretty far out there. And so unfortunately, my gun has been lost. Really, really, really sad about that because I loved my revolver so much. But as I was talking to my brother-in-law about it, he's like, you want a gun? What kind do you want? And so we went back and forth. So kind of each morning I go on a short little hike around here, but I've gone on some longer hikes as well, as I indicated, and on those I have been carrying a Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm. Just let me make sure that it's unloaded here. Yeah, so we're all unloaded. It's got a laser sight. You kind of squeeze here on the back and illuminates the laser sight. It's pretty compact little 9mm. And in my discussions with my brother, because he has quite a few guns, I was like, well, what would you want if you were out in the woods and, you know, you just needed to defend yourself against, you know, say a largish black bear? And he was like, I don't know, these are the pros and cons of each one. And I heard him say that the magazine of this gun fits 17 rounds. And I was like, you know, I haven't done any shooting in long enough that just having 17 rounds, it's a pretty valuable thing. Because I'm not so sure I'd be able to hit a target most of the time. But, you know, if there was an animal, you know, that I ran into, even just being able to make a loud, scary noise 17 times could prove to be relatively valuable. So I took this gun out and took it shooting to see where the iron sights and the laser are lined up and if I need to make any corrections, and I do. But then I've been taking it for my hikes, and I've been just really enjoying that and really thankful for my brother-in-law's generosity. So Smith & Wesson M&P 9mm. Figured I should probably do a little show and tell on the holster as well, because the holster is quite cool. Let me just take the clip out of that. There's no bullet in the chamber, I don't think. So, yeah. So, this holster is quite cool as well. It's injection molded, and it's made by iTac Defense, it looks like. And it pushes in, and there's a little nub here that clicks into the trigger well of the gun, and then you've got it secure there, and you have to push this button to release it. But it's quite cool because this molded piece of plastic kind of slips around your hip, and then there's a couple little wings that stick out there, and you can kind of get it down over your belt, and then those little wings sort of catch on your belt. So real quick and easy to install on your belt. And then once you've got the gun in, there's no way for you to reach the trigger in there, which is great because this gun doesn't have a safety. It just has a double trigger. I'll fire the pin for you to see, but there's a little wobble here, and that has to come down for the trigger to go back. So you have to intentionally pull in and back. I know that's not good for it, but I'm just demonstrating. Anyway, so there's no safety on the gun, but it's got a very effective, quick in and out sort of system, which is really nice if you're camping. You know, you're not going to pre-plan to see something. If you're out hiking, you're just going to need to be able to kind of grab and go. So it's kind of fun. That's it for Farm EDC 2. I'm gonna set up this camera rig again, and I'll give you guys a little bit of an update to show you what I've been using for mobile sharpening. It probably won't surprise most of you that much, but there are several new pieces of gear that I have been using a lot, and I wanna give a little micro review on those things. Thanks for tuning into this episode. I hope you're having a good day, and until next time, I'll say peace out from the home slice. Check out the video on screen if you want to see more content from me.